Back off the merchandise. Now. The hand closes around her bicep from behind. Fingers dig into muscle, grip meant to force movement without asking. Vivian Tate does not turn around. Her hands remain exactly where they are, visible, open, holding nothing. The burgundy leather crossbody sits untouched on its display pedestal. Remove your hand. Her voice is flat, measured, calm in a way that doesn't match the situation. The grip tightens. I said remove your hand. I haven't touched anything. The security guard steps around to face her. Thick neck, shaved head, arms straining his uniform sleeves. His name tag reads, Morton. Store policy, he says. You've been in here 20 minutes, touching everything, buying nothing. The intercom crackles overhead. A recorded voice reads the posted policy, the same words printed on a sign near the entrance that Vivian noted when she walked in. Northgate Galleria reserves the right to refuse service and request departure of any individual exhibiting suspicious behavior per Georgia Code Section 51-3-1. 20 minutes. She's been here 12. But she doesn't correct him, doesn't argue, doesn't raise her voice. What specific behavior constitutes suspicious? I've been browsing merchandise in a retail store. That's the purpose of a retail store. Morton's jaw tightens. Most people stammer when he grabs them. Most people fumble for excuses, wallets, apologies. This one just stands there, asking questions, using words like constitutes. Don't get smart with me. Somewhere behind the cosmetics counter, a phone is already dialing 911. If you're watching this and wondering how a Saturday shopping trip turns into something much worse, subscribe now, because what happens next will make your blood boil. 45 minutes earlier, Vivian Tate pulled her Honda Accord into the Northgate Galleria parking deck. Level 3, east side near the elevator bank. The car was 7 years old, meticulously maintained, unremarkable in every way. A reusable shopping bag sat folded in the back seat. A small notebook rested in the center console, spiral-bound, nothing fancy. Her clothes matched the car. Dark jeans, gray cardigan, white sneakers. No jewelry except a plain silver watch with a scratched face. She parked backing in, checked her mirrors twice before cutting the engine. Then she sat for a moment, scanning the parking deck through her windows, the camera mounted near the stairwell, the exit sign glowing green above the ramp, the white SUV 3 spaces down with a child's car seat visible in the back. This was her first day off in 3 weeks. She intended to spend it doing something normal, something that didn't involve paperwork or procedures or the weight of other people's emergencies. The elevator carried her down to the main level. The mall opened before her like a temple to consumption. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, vaulted ceilings with skylights letting in autumn sun, the ambient tinkle of a piano playing somewhere near the food court. The demographics skewed white and affluent, women with designer bags, men checking phones, families with strollers navigating around kiosks selling phone cases and skincare. Vivian walked past the jewelry stores without slowing, ignored the perfume sampler who stepped toward her with an eager smile. Her destination was specific: Bellamy & Cole, the leather goods boutique on the 2nd floor. She'd been saving for a particular bag, the Sinclair structured tote in cognac, $1,200 of Italian craftsmanship that she'd seen in a magazine 6 months ago and couldn't stop thinking about. Today was a milestone, not one she talked about, not one that required celebration or witnesses, just a private marker, a reward to herself for surviving another year of things she couldn't discuss. The escalator carried her upward. She noted, without meaning to, the security guard stationed near the fountain, the way he tracked a group of black teenagers until they disappeared into a sneaker store, the way his eyes then found her, held for a beat, then moved on. She was used to it, the looking, the assessment, the silent calculation happening behind eyes that saw her skin before they saw anything else. Bellamy & Cole occupied a corner unit with floor-to-ceiling windows. The interior was cool and dim, leather-scented, designed to feel exclusive. Handbags lined the walls like art installations. Each display case contained wallets, belts, accessories arranged with geometric precision. A sales associate noticed her the moment she crossed the threshold. The woman was blonde, mid-20s, wearing the store's signature navy blazer with a name tag that read Tiffany. She'd been arranging a display near the window. Now she adjusted her position, a subtle shift that kept Vivian in her sightline while pretending to examine a clutch. Vivian noticed, didn't react, walked to the handbag wall and began examining a burgundy crossbody. The stitching was tight and even. The hardware had weight to it, brass that would patina beautifully with time. She checked the interior lining, suede, unmarred, with a zippered pocket and 2 slip compartments. Those start at $800, just so you know. Tiffany had appeared beside her. The smile was polite. The message was not. Vivian set the bag down without responding, moved to the next display. Behind her, Tiffany whispered something to another associate, a brunette with sharp cheekbones and an expression that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. Both women glanced at Vivian. The brunette shrugged. Tiffany pulled out her phone, tapped something quickly, then pocketed it again. The store manager appeared 3 minutes later. She emerged from a door marked Staff Only, smoothing the front of her designer suit. Cream-colored, impeccably tailored, probably worth more than Vivian's monthly rent. Her hair was pulled back in a blonde chignon that looked architectural. Her smile had the practiced warmth of someone who'd taken customer service seminars and retained none of the lessons. Welcome to Bellamy & Cole. Her eyes moved from Vivian's face to her clothes to her sneakers and back again in one fluid assessment. Is there something specific I can help you find? The emphasis hung in the air like a question mark made of condescension. I'm browsing. I'll let you know if I need assistance. Of course. The smile didn't waver, but the eyes tracked Vivian's hands as she reached for another bag. I'm Lila. I'm the manager here. If you have any questions about our pricing structure, I'm happy to explain our layaway options. Layaway. For a woman who'd walked into a luxury store dressed practically. The assumption was clear. Vivian lifted a structured tote, not the Sinclair, a different design, and examined the clasp. I'm not interested in layaway, but thank you. Lila Fairbanks nodded once, made a small gesture with her left hand, fingers spread briefly, then closed. A signal to someone near the store entrance that Vivian caught in her peripheral vision. The security presence in the mall was about to increase. Chug. The man who appeared in the store entrance was the same one Vivian had seen near the fountain. Thick neck, shaved head, arms that suggested either a gym obsession or steroid use. His name tag read, Morton, All Safe Security Services. He didn't pretend to shop, didn't pretend to be doing anything other than watching her. He stood just inside the threshold, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Vivian as she moved through the store. She tried on a wallet, set it down, picked up a card case, examined the stitching, replaced it. Each item she touched, his gaze followed her hands like she was performing a magic trick he intended to catch. 12 minutes. She'd been in the store 12 minutes. She'd touched perhaps 6 items, handled each one carefully, replaced each one exactly where she'd found it. This was not unusual, not for her, not for anyone who looked like her in stores like this. She walked to the wall display where the Sinclair tote hung, cognac leather, brass hardware, the bag she'd come here to buy. $1,200. She had the money. She had the intention. What she didn't have, apparently, was the right to browse in peace. The security guard entered the store fully now, moved to examine a men's belt near the entrance, a transparent pretense that fooled no one. Vivian lifted the Sinclair tote from its hook, felt the weight of it, the quality, opened the flap to check the interior. Clean lines, solid construction, everything she'd hoped for. That's one of our signature pieces. Lila had returned, standing close enough now that Vivian could smell her perfume, something floral and aggressive. I know. I've been looking at it for 6 months. Have you? Not a question, an assessment. It's quite an investment. We do accept credit cards, of course. if you'd prefer to spread out the payments. I don't use credit cards. Debit, then. Or we could hold it for you while you consider. The implication was clear. This woman couldn't possibly afford this bag. This woman was in the wrong store. This woman should leave before she embarrassed herself further. Vivian set the tote back on its hook, not because she'd decided against it, because the interaction had soured something, and she needed a moment to decide whether the bag was worth the indignity of purchasing it from these people. She moved to a different display, picked up a black leather satchel, examined the brass clasp. The security guard's radio crackled. He lifted it to his ear, listened, responded with something too quiet to hear. Then he moved. Not toward the exit, toward her. "Ma'am, need to see some ID." He was close now, close enough that she could see the pores on his nose, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw worked like he was chewing something that wasn't there. For what reason? Store policy, random check. There was no such policy. Random ID checks of customers in retail stores were not legal, not standard, and not something any legitimate security protocol would include. Vivian knew this. Morton, apparently, did not, or didn't care. That's not how reasonable suspicion works. Has there been a report filed? He blinked. The question had caught him off guard. Most people fumbled for their wallets when he said ID. Most people assumed he had authority he didn't have, rights he couldn't claim, power that existed only because they believed in it. I'm asking nicely. His hand moved to his belt, not to a weapon, but to the radio, a reminder of backup he could call. Don't make this difficult. I'm a customer in a store. I've handled merchandise. I've replaced it. I haven't concealed anything. I haven't attempted to leave without paying. What specific behavior prompted this stop? His jaw tightened. The question had too many words, required too much thought, challenged the simple script he'd been running. Behind him, Lila Fairbanks was already on her phone, already talking to someone in low tones, already setting something in motion. Look, lady. My name isn't Lady, and unless you can articulate a specific reason for detention, this conversation is over. She turned back to the display, reached for a different bag, a clutch in navy leather, smaller, irrelevant. The gesture wasn't about the bag. It was about refusing to engage further with someone who had no legal basis for engagement. That's when he grabbed her arm. The grip was sudden and hard, fingers closing around her bicep from behind, pulling her backward, away from the display. "Back off the merchandise, now!" His voice carried across the store. The other shoppers, there were 4 of them now, 2 near the wallets, 2 examining scarves, all turned to look. Froze. A woman in her 60s, wearing pearls and an expression of horrified fascination, clutched her bag tighter and took a step back. Vivian did not pull away, did not struggle, did not raise her voice. Her hands remained visible, open, holding nothing. "You are now committing battery under Georgia Code Section 16523. I am not resisting. I am not fleeing. Remove your hand." The words came out calm, measured, the kind of calm that made people uncomfortable. Morton's grip tightened instead of releasing. "Lady, I don't know what law school you flunked out of, but you're coming with me until we sort this out." "Sort what out? What have I taken? What have I concealed?" "We'll figure that out." "That's not how this works. You can't detain someone to figure out if they've committed a crime. That's called false imprisonment." Lila Fairbanks appeared at Morton's elbow. Her practiced smile had become something sharper. Satisfaction, perhaps. Vindication. "Officers are on their way. 5 minutes." "Officers?" Vivian's voice remained level. "You called the police because I was browsing handbags?" "We called the police because you became aggressive when asked routine questions. It's all being documented." Aggressive. Vivian had not raised her voice, had not made any sudden movements, had not touched another person. The only physical contact in this interaction was Morton's hand on her arm. Contact she had not initiated, had not invited, was now being held by against her will. But she would be described as aggressive. That word would appear in reports, would be spoken to the arriving officers, would color every interaction that followed, because that's how this worked. That's how it always worked. I want your names, both of you, and I want your badge number. She directed this at Morton, and the name of your supervisor. You'll get whatever I decide to give you. The store's entrance darkened. Blue uniforms, 2 of them. Hull. What happens next is captured on bodycam, and when you see the footage, you'll understand why this story went viral. Keep watching. The officers who entered Bellamy and Cole were both white, both male, both carrying themselves with the casual authority of men accustomed to having their presence change a room. The first was athletic, mid-30s, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from something unforgiving. His hand rested on his belt, not on his weapon, but near it. Close enough to matter. His nameplate read, Pike. The second was softer, late 20s, rounder face, hanging back slightly. He had the look of someone who followed rather than led. His nameplate read, Hart. Neither officer asked Vivian what had happened. Neither officer asked for her side of the story. They walked in, assessed the scene, black woman being held by white security guard, white store manager standing nearby with arms crossed, and drew their conclusions. What do we have here? Pike directed the question at Morton, not at Vivian. Suspected shoplifter. Morton's grip on her arm hadn't loosened. Refused to show ID, got aggressive when I tried to detain her. That's not what happened. Vivian kept her voice steady, projected enough to be heard by witnesses. I was browsing merchandise. This man grabbed me without explanation. I asked for his legal basis for detention. He couldn't provide one. Pike turned to her. His eyes moved over her face, her clothes, her sneakers. The same assessment Lila had performed, with the same conclusions. Ma'am, I need you to calm down. She was calm. Her voice had not risen. Her breathing had not changed. Her pulse, visible at the base of her throat if anyone cared to look, was steady. There was nothing to calm down from. I am calm, officer. I'm asking what crime I'm suspected of committing. We're going to need to see some ID. Pike stepped closer, close enough that she could smell coffee on his breath, see the small patch of stubble he'd missed shaving that morning. And we're going to need to check your bag. Vivian carried a small crossbody purse, her own, not store merchandise. It hung at her hip, brown leather, worn at the edges. Under what authority? Ma'am, Terry v. Ohio requires reasonable, articulable suspicion of criminal activity for a stop. What crime do you suspect me of committing? Pike's jaw tightened. Beside him, Hart muttered something under his breath, words that sounded like another lawyer. Lila Fairbanks stepped forward. Officers, she's been in here for almost 20 minutes, handling expensive merchandise, and she hasn't purchased anything. 12 minutes, Vivian corrected automatically. And browsing is not a crime. She also refused to show ID when security asked, because security had no legal basis to demand it. Private security cannot compel identification from customers who haven't committed a crime. Pike's hand moved from his belt to his handcuffs. A warning gesture, a reminder of power. Ma'am, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Just show us your ID, let us check your bag, and if everything's fine, you can go about your day. And if I don't consent to a search? Then we have a problem. The standoff stretched. Outside the store, a small crowd had gathered, shoppers drawn by the presence of police, by the tension visible through the glass walls. Several had their phones out. Recording, Pike noticed. His posture changed subtly, shoulders squaring, chin lifting. He was performing now. Ma'am, you're causing a scene. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. I'm standing still with my hands visible. Any scene is of your making, officer. Someone in the crowd called out. She didn't do anything. I was watching the whole time. An older black man, gray beard, veteran's cap with faded insignia, standing near the fountain 20 feet away. His voice carried across the marble floor. Pike turned. Everyone back up. This is police business. I'm a citizen. I got a right to watch. Hart stepped toward the crowd. Sir, you need to move back or you'll be detained for obstruction. Obstruction of what? I'm standing on a public walkway. The veteran didn't move. Neither did the crowd. Phones continued recording. Pike turned back to Vivian. His face had reddened. The situation was slipping away from the script he'd expected. Compliant suspect, quick resolution, back to patrol. Instead, he had witnesses, cameras, questions. Last chance. ID. Now. Vivian reached slowly for her purse. Deliberately, keeping her movements visible. Pike's hand shot out, grabbed her wrist. Slow, real slow. She opened her bag with one hand, the other immobilized in his grip. Removed her wallet, extracted her driver's license, held it up. He snatched it, examined it, frowned. Vivian Tate, Decatur address. He handed the license to Hart. Run it. Hart spoke into his radio. Numbers, codes, the language of law enforcement translated through static. Vivian waited. Her arm ached where Morton still held it. Her wrist throbbed where Pike had grabbed it. But her breathing stayed steady. Her face stayed neutral. 2 minutes passed. Hart returned. She's clean. No warrants. No priors. Pike's expression didn't change. That doesn't mean she didn't take something today. He turned back to Vivian. Ma'am, we're going to need to search your bag. No. Excuse me? I do not consent to a search. You have no probable cause. My record is clean. No merchandise is missing. Ask the store to do an inventory if you doubt me. She paused. Let the words land. I'm leaving. She took one step toward the exit. Pike moved to block her. You're not going anywhere until I say so. The veteran in the crowd stepped forward again. His voice was loud enough to echo off the marble. Officer, I've been watching this whole thing. That woman didn't steal anything. You're harassing her. Hart turned on him. Sir, I warned you once. Step back or you're going in cuffs. For what? For being a witness? For obstruction. Hart put a hand on the veteran's chest. Pushed. The older man stumbled back a step, caught himself on the fountain's edge. The crowd murmured. More phones rose, more cameras pointed. Vivian watched, noted the veteran's unit patch, 82nd Airborne, faded but visible. Noted Hart's hand placement, center mass, not shoulder. Noted Pike's hand moving to his taser, then away again as he registered the cameras. She cataloged everything, filed it away. Evidence, documentation, the raw material of accountability. Ma'am, Pike's voice had dropped lower, harder. You can either cooperate, or you can make this a lot worse for yourself. I've been cooperating. I showed you my ID. My record is clean. I've committed no crime. Under what legal authority are you continuing to detain me? You were asked to leave and you refused. I was never asked to leave. I was grabbed, accused, and surrounded. That's not asking. Lila Fairbanks interjected. I'm asking now. You're trespassed from this store. Leave the premises immediately. Fine. Then release me so I can leave. Morton still had her arm. Pike still blocked the exit. The request to leave had been issued, but the ability to comply had been physically prevented. She's right. The voice came from the crowd, a white woman, 40s, business suit, expensive haircut. You can't tell her to leave and then not let her leave. That's not how that works. Pike shot the woman a look. She didn't flinch. The tension in the store had shifted. The crowd wasn't passive anymore. Wasn't just watching. Something about the situation, the visible grip on Vivian's arm, the blocked exit, the contradictory commands, had changed the calculus. Pike made a decision, jerked his head at Morton. Let her go. Morton released her arm reluctantly. The imprint of his fingers remained, red marks that would purple into bruises by morning. Vivian rubbed her bicep. Didn't move toward the exit. I want this documented. I want a complaint number. I want your badge numbers. All three of you. You'll get a complaint number when you file a complaint. If you file a complaint. Now get out of this store before I find something to charge you with. She held Pike's gaze for a long moment. Then she pulled her phone from her purse, opened the camera, hit record. Georgia is a one-party consent state for recordings. I am that party. For the record, I'm documenting that I was physically detained without probable cause, denied the ability to leave when ordered to leave, and threatened with arrest for asking questions. Officer Pike, badge number? His face went dark red. Put that phone away. Badge number, officer. 442. He spat it like a curse. Officer Hart? Hart glanced at Pike, got no guidance. 443. And you? She turned to Morton. Name and employer? Gage Morton. All safe security. Thank you. She lowered the phone slightly but kept it recording. I'll be filing complaints with Cobb County Police Internal Affairs, the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council, and whatever licensing body oversees private security in this state. You'll be hearing from me. She walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for her. Pike didn't move to stop her, but as she passed him, he spoke low enough that only she could hear. You think you're smart. You think you know the law better than me. But I've got your name now, your address. I know what car you drive. She stopped, turned to face him. Is that a threat, officer? His smile was thin, mean. It's information. Have a nice day, ma'am. Ciao. She made it to the parking deck before her hands started shaking. Not from fear, or not only from fear. From the adrenaline finally finding release, from the effort of maintaining composure through 30 minutes of escalating confrontation, from the knowledge of how badly that could have gone. Her arm throbbed where Morton had grabbed her. Her wrist ached where Pike had seized it. The fingerprint bruises would be visible by tonight, documented evidence of the force applied to her body without justification. She sat in her car for 5 minutes, breathed, let the shaking subside. Then she reviewed the video on her phone, made sure it had saved, uploaded it to 3 different cloud services, sent a copy to an email address she checked only for emergencies. Documentation, evidence, the raw material of accountability. She'd been doing this for 18 years. She knew how these situations ended, knew the statistics, complaints that went nowhere, officers who faced no consequences, civilians who died because someone in a uniform felt disrespected. She also knew that sometimes, rarely, painfully, against all institutional resistance, the system could be forced to work, could be made to acknowledge wrongdoing, could be bent, if not toward justice, then at least toward accountability. That required evidence, required documentation, required patience. She started the car, pulled out of the parking space, drove toward the exit. In her rearview mirror, she saw a police cruiser parked near the elevator bank. Officer Pike stood beside it, watching her go. He lifted one hand, not a wave, a gesture. I see you. I remember you. She drove out of the deck without looking back. The apartment was small but clean. Second floor of a brick building in Decatur, 10 minutes from the federal courthouse. She'd lived here for 6 years, since the divorce. The space suited her. 1 bedroom, minimal furniture, nothing that required maintenance or explanation. She made tea, not because she wanted it, but because the ritual was calming. Kettle on, mug selected, tea bag unwrapped. Familiar motions that required no thought. While the water heated, she opened her laptop, created a new folder, dated it, began documenting everything she could remember. October 14th, 2024. Approximately 2:30 p.m. Entered Bellamy and Cole, Northgate Galleria. She wrote for an hour. Every detail, every word she could remember, every name, every badge number, every timestamp. Then she opened a new tab. Searched for the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council complaint form. Downloaded it. Began filling it out. Nature of complaint: unlawful detention, excessive force, failure to identify, threatening statements. Officers involved: Dorian Pike, Badge 442, Cobb County Police. Wells Hart, Badge 443, Cobb County Police. Witnesses: unknown male, military veteran, present at scene. Unknown female, professional attire, present at scene. Multiple additional shoppers, names unknown, video footage likely available. The tea grew cold beside her keyboard. She didn't notice. By midnight, she had completed 4 forms, filed them electronically, printed copies for her records, drafted a FOIA request for all bodycam footage from the incident. Then she sat back, looked at the bruises darkening on her arm, and considered what she would do next. 3 days passed. She went to work, came home, waited. The work was familiar: courthouse security, federal jurisdiction, the kind of assignment that required vigilance without drama. Stand post, watch for threats. Be visible enough to deter, invisible enough not to distract. Her co-workers noticed the bruises, asked once if she was okay. She said yes. They didn't ask again. On October 17th, she received an automated email. Your complaint has been received. Internal Affairs Case Number IA 2024-0847. Status: under review, under review. The holding pattern where complaints went to die. She also received a letter. Certified mail, official letterhead. Northgate Galleria trespass warning. Pursuant to Georgia Code Section 16-721, you are hereby warned that you are not permitted on Northgate Galleria property. Any return will result in arrest for criminal trespass. Signed, Sergeant Sloan Avery, Badge 891, Cobb County Police Department. A sergeant she'd never met, who'd never witnessed the incident, who'd signed a trespass order based entirely on whatever Pike and Hart had written in their reports. She folded the letter, filed it with her documentation, made a note of Sergeant Avery's name and badge number. Then she filed another FOIA request, this one for all security call logs from Bellamy and Cole, going back 18 months. The pattern, if there was one, would be in the data. The bodycam footage arrived 2 weeks later. A thumb drive in a manila envelope, official county seal, no cover letter. She plugged it into a secured laptop, created a new folder, documented the chain of custody, date received, condition of packaging, method of delivery. Then she hit play. The footage was from Pike's camera. The timestamp read 14:53:22. The audio was tinny but audible. Pike approaches. The subject, Vivian, stands near a display of handbags. Her hands are visible. Her posture is still. "Ma'am, we're going to need to see some ID." "Under what authority?" "Don't make this difficult." At 14:54:01, Pike grabs her arm. She doesn't pull away. Her voice comes through clearly. "You are committing battery under Georgia Code 16-523. Pike's response: "I don't know what law school you flunked out of." Vivian watched the footage twice, 3 times, noted the moments where Pike's version of events, aggressive, belligerent, refusing to cooperate, was directly contradicted by his own camera. Then she switched to Hart's footage and found the gap. The timestamp jumped. 14:58:33 to 15:08:47. 10 minutes and 14 seconds of nothing. A notation at the bottom of the file read, "Technical malfunction. Under investigation. 10 minutes." The exact window that would have covered the most critical moments of the interaction. The escalation. The threats. Pike's words about knowing her name, her address, her car. Gone. She saved the files. Made copies. Documented the gap in her growing file. Technical malfunction. The phrase that covered a multitude of sins. This is where most stories end. A black woman, alone, against a system designed to protect its own. But Vivian Tate is not most people. And what she does next will change everything. Stay with me. The security call logs arrived 3 weeks after her request. Heavily redacted, but readable. She spread the pages across her kitchen table. 23 entries, all from Bellamy and Cole. All placed by the same person, Lila Fairbanks, store manager. She began categorizing: date, time, subject description, outcome. January 15th, 2023. Suspicious individual, black male, 20s. Outcome, no theft confirmed. Trespass warning issued. February 8th, 2023. Suspicious individual, black female, 30s. Outcome, no theft confirmed. Subject left voluntarily. March 22nd, 2023. Suspicious individual, black male, 40s. Outcome, no theft confirmed. Trespass warning issued. The pattern emerged with sickening clarity. 23 calls over 18 months. 22 of them involved black patrons. 0 confirmed thefts. 17 trespass warnings issued to people who had committed no crime. 1 call involved a white teenager who'd actually been caught on camera slipping a wallet into her jacket. She'd been asked to return the item and leave. No police called, no trespass warning, no record beyond an internal incident report. 22 out of 23. Vivian highlighted the numbers, printed the analysis, added it to her file. This wasn't about her anymore. This was a pattern, a practice, a system of targeting that someone had decided was acceptable. She picked up her phone, dialed the number on the Internal Affairs receipt. Cobb County Police, Internal Affairs Division. This is Vivian Tate, complaint number IA 2024-0847. I have additional evidence to submit. A pause. The sound of typing. Ms. Tate, your case is currently under review. You can submit additional materials by mail, or I'd like to speak with the investigator assigned to my case. Another pause. Longer this time. Please hold. Muzak. The same kind that had played in the mall. Soft and forgettable. Then a new voice. Male. Older. Tired in a way that suggested he'd been tired for years. Ms. Tate, this is Marcus Delwood, Internal Affairs. I've been assigned to your complaint. Mr. Delwood, I have documentation of a pattern of racial profiling at the store where my incident occurred. 22 of 23 security calls over 18 months targeted black patrons. 0 confirmed thefts. I'd like to submit this evidence. Silence on the line. The kind of silence that meant someone was thinking. Can you come in? Tomorrow, 10 a.m.? She hadn't expected that. Complaints like hers usually died in paperwork. Investigators didn't call back. Didn't ask for meetings. I'll be there. Bring everything you have. He paused. And Ms. Tate? The move you used on Officer Pike. The one that dislocated his elbow. Her blood went cold. She hadn't mentioned that. Hadn't known Pike's injury was that severe. The only way Delwood would know... I don't know what you're referring to. I've seen the footage. What we have of it, anyway. Another pause. I've also seen that move before. FLETC teaches it. Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. The line hummed with static, with implication. I'll see you at 10, Ms. Tate. He hung up before she could respond. No. The Cobb County Police Headquarters was a gray building that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated architects. Concrete, glass, fluorescent lighting visible even from outside. Vivian arrived at 9:45, dressed simply, dark slacks, white blouse, her credentials left at home. Today she was a civilian filing a complaint. Nothing more. Marcus Delwood met her in the lobby. He was black, 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the posture of a man who'd spent too many years hunched over desks. His handshake was firm. His eyes were assessing. Ms. Tate, thank you for coming. Thank you for seeing me. He led her through a maze of hallways to a small office. Neat desk, files stacked precisely. Family photo, wife, 2 grown children, facing outward. A man who wanted visitors to know he had something to protect. "Please, sit." She sat, placed her folder on the desk between them. "I've reviewed the bodycam footage." He opened his own folder. Spread photos, stills from the video. "Pike's report says you were belligerent and aggressive. The footage shows you standing still with your hands visible, citing statute numbers." "His version doesn't match his own camera." "No, it doesn't." He tapped another page. "Hart's report says you attacked Pike unprovoked. The witnesses, 6 of them, all civilians, say Pike charged you, that you stepped aside and used his momentum against him. Self-defense. Textbook self-defense. The kind they teach at federal law enforcement academies." He removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes. "Off the record, Ms. Tate. Who trained you?" She met his gaze, said nothing. "I've been doing this job for 19 years. Most civilian complaints, I can see both sides. Someone escalates. Someone overreacts. The truth is usually somewhere in the middle." He closed his folder. "This one's different. You didn't escalate. You didn't overreact. You did exactly what someone with extensive training would do: de-escalate, document, defend only when physically necessary. Is that relevant to your investigation? Maybe not, but it's relevant to how I write my recommendations." He leaned back. "The footage gap on Hart's camera, 10 minutes, 14 seconds. We sent it to the state lab for analysis. You know what they found?" She waited. "Manual deletion. Someone stopped that camera intentionally, then started it again. That's not a malfunction, that's evidence tampering." The air in the room shifted. This wasn't a brush-off meeting. This wasn't an investigator going through the motions. "What happens now?" "Now I make some calls, talk to some people, figure out how deep this goes." He stood, extended his hand. "Don't leave town, Miss Tate. I have a feeling we're going to be talking again." She shook his hand. Gathered her folder. "Mr. Delwood, the pattern analysis I mentioned, Bellamy and Cole. 22 of 23 calls targeting black patrons. You'll find it in my file." "I saw it." He walked her to the door. "It's not just that store, you know. I pulled the logs for the whole mall. Northgate Galleria, 3 years of data." She stopped, turned. "How bad?" "Bad enough that I've requested a meeting with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Civil Rights Division." He held her gaze. "Someone's been running a system, Ms. Tate, and you just pulled the thread that might unravel it." She drove home in silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the hum of the road and the weight of what she'd learned. A system. Not just one store manager with prejudice. Not just 2 officers having a bad day. A pattern. A practice. Something organized. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it ring. Let it go to voicemail. When she checked the message later, there was only silence. 15 seconds of dead air. Then a click. Probably nothing, she told herself. But she saved the voicemail anyway. Added it to her documentation. Evidence. The raw material of accountability. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with the trespass warning in front of her. The signature at the bottom, Sergeant Sloan Avery, badge 891. A sergeant who'd never witnessed the incident. Who'd signed off on a document based entirely on what his officers told him. Who might know about the pattern, or might be part of it, or might just be another cog in a machine that had been grinding for years. She opened her laptop, created a new document, timeline of events, key figures, known evidence, unknown variables. She worked until 2 a.m, building a case, connecting dots, preparing for whatever came next. Outside her window, a car sat parked across the street, headlights off, engine running. She noticed it, documented it, pulled her curtains closed. At 2:47 a.m., the car drove away. So, 3 months passed. November became December, became January. The holidays came and went. She worked through most of them, volunteering for shifts that let colleagues spend time with families. The case moved at the pace of bureaucracy. Documents requested, documents received, depositions scheduled, then rescheduled. The slow machinery of accountability grinding forward one form at a time. Then, on January 12th, she received a letter. Cobb County Administrative Complex, Conference Room B, January 15th, 10:00 a.m., Internal Affairs, Disciplinary Hearing. Your presence is required. Required, not requested. She read the letter 3 times, made a copy, filed the original. Then she called Marcus Delwood. I got your notice. Good, be there early. Things are going to move fast. What kind of things? A pause, the sound of a door closing. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more careful. You remember that meeting I mentioned, with the U.S. Attorney's Office? Yes. They're sending someone, Civil Rights Division, and they're bringing your file, the real one, the one that explains how you knew to cite statute numbers from memory, the one that explains that move you used on Pike. Her stomach dropped. That file is sealed. Not to federal prosecutors. He exhaled. Ms. Tate, I don't know what you did before you became a civilian, but whatever it is, it's about to come out. I thought you should be prepared. The line went dead. She sat in her apartment, phone in hand, staring at the wall. 18 years. 18 years of service, of sacrifice, of building a career brick by brick in a system that made people like her fight for every inch. And now that system was about to discover that the woman they'd targeted, detained, brutalized, and dismissed was one of their own. The night before the hearing, Vivian didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with 18 years of her life spread out before her. Commendations, training certificates, performance reviews, the formal letter of appointment signed by a U.S. Marshal she'd never met, but whose signature had changed the trajectory of her existence. Deputy United States Marshal, Northern District of Georgia, badge number 4471. She'd earned that badge, fought for it, bled for it, once, during a fugitive apprehension in Savannah that had left a scar along her left forearm that she still traced sometimes when she couldn't sleep. And now it was about to become public. Not because she'd chosen to reveal it, not because the situation demanded it, but because federal prosecutors had decided that her identity was relevant to their case. She understood the logic. A civilian complaint against officers was one thing, dismissible, forgettable, another entry in a file that would gather dust. But an assault on a federal law enforcement officer? That was different. That carried weight. That made careers end. She just wished she'd had a choice in how it came out. At 4 a.m., she gave up on sleep, made coffee, stood at her window watching the street below. The car that had been parked there 3 months ago, the one with the headlights off and the engine running, hadn't returned. Or if it had, she hadn't noticed it. But she'd started varying her routes to work, checking her mirrors more often. The kind of precautions that felt paranoid until you remembered that a police officer had looked her in the eye and recited her home address as a threat. I know what car you drive. She'd traded the Honda in 2 weeks after the incident. Drove a different vehicle now. A gray Nissan, equally unremarkable, but with plates that weren't in any system Pike could access. Paranoid, or prudent. The line between them had blurred. At 7 a.m., she showered, dressed. Dark suit this time, professional, appropriate for a hearing. She clipped her credentials to the inside of her jacket pocket, hidden but present. Just in case. The Cobb County Administrative Complex was busier than she'd expected. A Tuesday morning in January, and the parking lot was nearly full. She found a spot on the far end, walked the length of the building, and entered through the main doors. Security checkpoint. Metal detectors. A deputy she didn't recognize waved her through after a cursory glance at her ID. Conference Room B was on the 2nd floor. She took the stairs. Elevators made her feel trapped, a quirk she'd never fully explained to anyone, and emerged into a hallway, lined with plaques and photographs, county commissioners, police chiefs, the faces of institutional power, almost uniformly white and male, staring down at her as she walked. Marcus Delwood was waiting outside the conference room door. "Ms. Tate?" He looked tired, the kind of tired that came from too many late nights and not enough answers. "Before we go in, there's something you should know. The federal prosecutor, you mentioned her. It's not just her." He glanced down the hallway, lowered his voice. "Pike's lawyer filed a motion this morning, claiming your complaint is fraudulent, that you're not who you say you are, that you have a hidden agenda." Vivian felt something cold settle in her chest. What kind of hidden agenda? "He's arguing that you're some kind of activist, that the whole incident was staged to embarrass the department, that you deliberately provoked his client." "I was shopping for a handbag." "I know, but he's going to make this about you, your background, your training, why you didn't identify yourself as law enforcement when the situation escalated." Delwood met her eyes. "Be ready for that. And be ready for the reveal. The federal prosecutor, Whitmore, she's bringing your personnel file, the full one." "I know." "She's going to read it into the record, in front of Pike, in front of his lawyer, in front of the panel." "I know." He studied her for a long moment. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find it. "Okay, let's go." The conference room B was larger than she'd expected. Wood-paneled walls, an American flag in the corner, a long table with microphones at each seat, the kind of setup that suggested official proceedings would be recorded and transcribed. The panel sat at one end, 3 people, 2 men and a woman, all in civilian clothes. Delwood had briefed her on them: the assistant chief of police, the head of the county's civilian oversight board, and a representative from the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council. The people who would decide whether Pike, Hart, and Avery faced consequences. The officers sat at the other end of the table. Pike's arm was no longer in a sling, but he held it stiffly, protectively. Hart sat beside him, looking anywhere but at Vivian. Sergeant Avery, whom she was seeing for the first time, was older than she'd imagined, silver at the temples, a beer gut that strained his dress uniform, the look of a man who'd been counting down to retirement and had just realized the count might end differently than he'd planned. Their union representative sat with them, a balding man in an expensive suit with the smug expression of someone who'd won more of these hearings than he'd lost. Vivian took her seat in the middle of the room. Delwood sat beside her. And then the door opened again. The woman who entered was black, mid-40s, wearing a gray suit that probably cost more than Vivian's monthly salary. Her hair was natural, cropped short, silver threads catching the fluorescent light. She carried a briefcase that looked heavy. Behind her came a second figure. White man, younger, with the unmistakable posture of federal law enforcement. He took a position near the door, not sitting, just standing, watching. "For the record," the woman said, her voice carrying across the room without effort, "I'm Denise Whitmore, Assistant United States Attorney, Civil Rights Division. I'm here as an observer and, if necessary, a witness. The United States Attorney's Office has an active interest in the proceedings today." The union rep's smug expression flickered, just for a moment. Then it reassembled itself. "This is an internal disciplinary hearing. Federal involvement seems excessive. Federal involvement is warranted when there's evidence of civil rights violations under color of law." Whitmore set her briefcase on the table, opened it, removed a folder. "Shall we begin?" This is the moment everything changes. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what comes next is the kind of reveal that makes careers end and headlines write themselves. The hearing began with procedure. Introductions, reading of the complaint, summary of the allegations. Vivian listened as Delwood presented the case against the officers. Unlawful detention, excessive force, false statements in official reports, failure to intervene, evidence tampering. The union rep objected to each allegation. Lack of evidence. Conflicting testimony. The complainant's credibility. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of delivery that came from years of defending the indefensible. My clients were responding to a call about a suspected shoplifter. They followed standard procedure. The complainant was argumentative and aggressive. When Officer Pike attempted to detain her for questioning, she attacked him, unprovoked, causing serious injury. If anyone should be facing charges, it's her. He gestured at Vivian without looking at her, as if she were an object, an obstacle, something to be managed rather than heard. "Ms. Tate," the panel chair said, the assistant chief, a white man in his 60s with a face that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "You'll have an opportunity to respond, but first we need to address the matter of evidence." Delwood stood. The Internal Affairs investigation has compiled extensive documentation, bodycam footage from Officer Pike, with timestamps, witness statements from 6 civilians present at the scene, store security logs showing a pattern of discriminatory calls, and, he paused, glanced at Whitmore, analysis from the FBI Digital Evidence Laboratory regarding the footage gap on Officer Hart's camera. The union rep's pen stopped moving. What analysis? Whitmore rose, opened her briefcase, removed a bound document. Exhibit Federal 2, FBI Digital Evidence Laboratory Report, dated December 3, 2024. Subject: Bodycam footage, Officer Wells Hart, badge 443, October 14, 2024. She began reading. Her voice was flat, clinical, the delivery of someone presenting facts rather than arguments. Finding: the footage gap of 10 minutes and 14 seconds, previously attributed to technical malfunction, was not caused by equipment failure. File metadata indicates the recording was manually stopped at 14:58:33 and manually restarted at 15:08:47. Forensic analysis of the device confirms physical manipulation of the record function during this window. She set the document down. Conclusion: the footage was intentionally deleted. Silence in the room. Hart's face had gone pale. Pike's jaw was tight. Avery stared at the table. The union rep recovered first. This report hasn't been authenticated. We haven't had time to review it. This should have been disclosed." "It was disclosed 48 hours ago, to this panel and to your office." Whitmore's voice didn't change, didn't rise, didn't need to. "If you didn't review it, that's not a discovery failure. That's a preparation failure." The panel chair shuffled his papers. "We've reviewed the FBI report. It's been admitted into evidence." "This is outrageous." "Counselor." The chair's voice sharpened. "Sit down. You'll have your opportunity." The union rep sat, but his smugness was gone now, replaced by something that looked like the early stages of fear. Whitmore continued. Document after document, exhibit after exhibit, the receipts Vivian had spent 3 months gathering, now formalized and amplified by federal resources. The store security logs, 22 of 23 calls targeting black patrons. The witness statements. 6 civilians, all saying the same thing. She didn't do anything. She was calm. The officers escalated. The bodycam footage, Pike's own camera contradicting his own report. And then, finally, the document that changed everything. "Before I present the final exhibit," Whitmore said, "I need to address a procedural matter. The Respondents' Council has questioned the complainant's credibility, has suggested she's an activist with a hidden agenda, has implied that her background makes her testimony suspect." She turned to face Pike directly. "I'm about to remove any doubt about who Vivian Tate is." She opened a new folder, removed a document, held it up for the room to see. Exhibit Federal 1, United States Marshals Service Personnel File, Complainant Vivian Renee Tate. Pike's face changed. The color drained first, a visible pallor that spread from his forehead to his jaw. Then the realization hit, and something else replaced it, something that looked like the beginning of understanding that his career was over. Whitmore read aloud, each word landing like a verdict. Name: Vivian Renee Tate. Current position: Deputy United States Marshal, Northern District of Georgia. Appointment date: March 2006, 18 years of federal law enforcement service. She paused. Let it sink in. Commendations: 6. Disciplinary actions: 0. Specialized training includes FLETC, Advanced Defensive Tactics, Instructor Certification Level, Fugitive Apprehension, Judicial Security, and Witness Protection Operations. The union rep was on his feet. We weren't informed. This changes the entire nature of... It changes nothing about what your clients did. Whitmore set the document down. Officer Pike detained a citizen without probable cause. Officer Hart deleted evidence. Sergeant Avery signed a trespass warning based on false reports without conducting any independent investigation. She turned back to the panel. The fact that their victim happens to be a federal law enforcement officer doesn't change the nature of their conduct. It simply makes it more visible, more documented, more impossible to ignore. Vivian sat motionless through the reveal, watching the faces change, watching Pike's smug certainty collapse into something raw and afraid, watching Hart's attempt at invisibility fail completely, watching Avery close his eyes as if he could make it all disappear. The union rep was still talking, something about due process, about inadequate notice, about requesting a continuance, but the panel wasn't listening anymore. They were looking at her. At the woman they'd been prepared to dismiss as another angry civilian, another troublemaker, another file to be buried. Deputy United States Marshal. The words hung in the air like a judgment. Ms. Tate. The panel chair's voice had changed. Something that might have been respect, or might have been fear of federal oversight, had crept into his tone. Would you like to make a statement? She stood slowly, smoothed her jacket, kept her hands visible, her posture neutral, the same way she'd stood in that store 3 months ago, when everything was different and nothing was different at all. For the record, she said, I was off duty on October 14th. I was not carrying my credentials. I was not acting in any official capacity. I was browsing handbags in a store I'd never visited before, planning to buy a birthday gift for myself. She paused, let the simplicity of it settle over the room. I did not identify myself as law enforcement because there was no reason to. I was a customer, a civilian, a black woman shopping in a public place. That should have been enough. It should have been sufficient to be treated with basic dignity. Pike was staring at his hands now, unable to meet her eyes. But it wasn't enough. Because Mr. Morton grabbed me based on my appearance, because Officer Pike detained me based on assumptions, because Officer Hart deleted footage that would have proven my account, because Sergeant Avery signed documents without asking a single question. She looked at each of them in turn. Morton wasn't present. This was a police disciplinary hearing, not a security contractor issue, but the others were all here, all facing the consequences of choices they'd made. I am trained to de-escalate, to document, to defend myself only when necessary and with minimal force. That training is the only reason Officer Pike has a dislocated elbow instead of something worse. That training is the only reason Officer Hart didn't tase an unarmed woman in front of a dozen witnesses. Her voice hadn't risen, hadn't needed to. But I shouldn't have needed that training. I shouldn't have needed to know exactly which statutes protect me from illegal detention. I shouldn't have needed to keep my hands visible and my voice steady while being manhandled by someone twice my size. I shouldn't have needed to be a deputy U.S. Marshal to be treated like a human being. She sat down. The room was silent. The hearing continued for another 2 hours. Testimony. Cross-examination. The union rep's increasingly desperate attempts to discredit evidence that had already been admitted, authenticated, and entered into the record. But the outcome was already decided. Vivian could see it in the panel's faces, in the way they asked questions that were really confirmations, in the way they looked at Pike with something that had moved past disappointment into disgust. When the panel chair finally called for a recess to deliberate, the union rep cornered her in the hallway. "You should have identified yourself." His voice was low, angry. "You let this happen. You could have ended it with 2 words, federal officer, and you chose not to." Vivian met his eyes, didn't blink. "And that would have made it acceptable? If I'd been just a regular citizen, a school teacher, a nurse, someone's grandmother, they would have deserved what happened to them?" He didn't have an answer for that. "The problem isn't that they attacked a federal officer. The problem is that they attacked anyone at all. The badge doesn't make me more human. It just makes the system pay attention." She walked away before he could respond. The panel returned after 40 minutes, long enough for deliberation, short enough to suggest the outcome hadn't been in doubt. "We've reached our recommendations," the chair announced. "These will be forwarded to the Chief of Police for final action." He opened a folder, read from the page. "Officer Dorian Pike, Badge 442. Recommendation: termination. The evidence demonstrates a pattern of unlawful conduct, false statements in official reports, and use of excessive force against a citizen who posed no threat." Pike's face didn't change. He'd known. They'd all known. "Officer Wells Hart, Badge 443. Recommendation: indefinite suspension without pay, pending the outcome of criminal investigation into evidence tampering. The FBI report establishes intentional deletion of bodycam footage during a critical incident. This conduct is incompatible with continued employment as a peace officer." Hart looked like he might vomit. The reality of criminal investigation was finally hitting him. "Sergeant Sloan Avery, Badge 891. Recommendation: demotion to patrol officer, mandatory retraining on supervisory responsibilities and use of force policy. While Sergeant Avery was not present during the initial incident, his failure to conduct any independent investigation before signing the trespass warning contributed to the ongoing harm to the complainant." Avery nodded once, accepting. He was 3 years from retirement. A demotion was survivable. Termination would have ended his pension. The chair closed the folder. Additionally, this panel is recommending a department-wide audit of interactions at Northgate Galleria and a review of the contractual relationship with all safe security services. The pattern of discriminatory calls identified in the evidence suggests systemic issues beyond the conduct of individual officers. He looked at Whitmore. "I understand the U.S. Attorney's Office has additional announcements." Whitmore rose. She didn't need notes for this part. The words had been prepared for weeks, waiting for this moment. Based on the evidence gathered during this investigation, the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia is opening a formal criminal investigation under 18 U.S.C. Sever 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. She paused, let the statute number hang in the air. Officers Pike and Hart are subjects of this investigation. The evidence of intentional evidence destruction has also been referred to a federal grand jury for consideration of charges under 18 U.S.C. Section 159, obstruction of justice through destruction of records. The union rep was writing furiously. Criminal charges, federal criminal charges. His clients had moved from disciplinary hearing to potential felony prosecution in the span of an afternoon. Additionally, Whitmore continued, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division has opened a preliminary inquiry into potential pattern or practice violations at the Cobb County Police Department. This inquiry will examine the evidence of racially discriminatory policing at Northgate Galleria and determine whether broader systemic issues warrant a full investigation. She gathered her documents. The United States takes seriously its obligation to protect the civil rights of all citizens, including those who wear badges and those who don't. What happened to Deputy Marshal Tate could have happened to anyone. The fact that it happened to a federal officer simply ensured that it couldn't be ignored. She looked at Pike one final time. That's all the justice system can promise. Not that bad things won't happen, just that sometimes When there's enough evidence, enough witnesses, enough people refusing to look away, there will be consequences. The system that tried to silence her is now the one on trial. But justice moves slowly, and what comes next shows just how hard it is to change anything. Don't miss what happens in the months that follow. The months after the hearing moved at 2 speeds simultaneously. In one version, everything changed. Pike was formally terminated. Hart was suspended pending criminal proceedings. Avery was demoted, reassigned to patrol duty in a district far from Northgate Galleria. The union filed appeals, motions, protests, all of which wound their way through administrative channels while accomplishing nothing. All Safe Security Services terminated Gage Morton 3 days after the hearing. The company's lawyer called it a personnel decision unrelated to pending matters, but the timing fooled no one. Corporate was distancing itself from liability. Morton, who had no union protection and no federal investigation shielding him from civil action, was on his own. Bellamy & Cole issued a statement through its parent company, Hartwell Luxury Group. We are committed to providing a welcoming environment for all customers. We take seriously any allegations of discriminatory conduct and are reviewing our policies to ensure they reflect our values. The statement said nothing about Lila Fairbanks, nothing about the 22 calls targeting black patrons, nothing about the system that had operated for 18 months under corporate oversight without a single intervention. But Lila was quietly transferred to a store in Alabama. Not fired. That would have been an admission. Just relocated, reassigned. The corporate equivalent of changing the subject. In this version, progress was visible. Headlines were written. Politicians made statements. The word accountability appeared in press releases. In the other version, the one that existed beneath the headlines, almost nothing changed. Pike's termination was under appeal. Hart's suspension was pending investigation. Avery's demotion was subject to review. The recommendations from the panel were recommendations, not orders. The chief of police had final authority, and the chief was an elected official who answered to a county that was 62% white and suspicious of anything that looked like criticism of law enforcement. The DOJ inquiry was preliminary. The pattern or practice investigation was under consideration. The federal grand jury was reviewing evidence, which meant months of process before any charges might be filed, if charges were filed at all. And the bodycam policy, the one concrete reform that had emerged from the settlement discussions, was pending budget approval. Vivian knew how this worked. She'd been in the system long enough to understand its rhythms. Progress came in inches, not miles. Victories were partial, provisional, always at risk of reversal. You fought for accountability, knowing that accountability was the floor, not the ceiling, the minimum acceptable outcome, not justice. Justice was something else entirely, something the system wasn't built to deliver. The civil case settled in March. Vivian's attorney, a woman named Patricia Hendricks, who specialized in civil rights litigation and had been waiting years for a case this clean, had filed suit against Cobb County, the individual officers, and Hartwell Luxury Group in December. The defendants had fought discovery for 2 months before realizing that federal prosecutors had already gathered more evidence than a civil case would ever require. The settlement offer came on a Tuesday afternoon. $260,000 total. Patricia laid out the terms on her office conference table. $185 from Cobb County, $75 from Hartwell, both payable within 60 days. Vivian looked at the numbers. They were larger than she'd expected, smaller than what the case was worth. No admission of wrongdoing. Standard language. They never admit. It's in their insurance policies. Admission of liability voids coverage. So they pay $250,000 and get to pretend nothing happened. Patricia leaned back. That's one way to look at it. Another way, 3 officers are facing career consequences. 2 are subjects of a federal criminal investigation. A corporation just wrote a check that will show up on their quarterly reports. A police department is being audited by the DOJ. She paused. And then there's this. She slid another document across the table. Vivian picked it up, read the heading. Settlement Term 7B, Policy Implementation. That's non-negotiable. Part of the deal. Cobb County agrees to implement mandatory bodycam activation with automatic cloud backup. No more local deletion. No more technical malfunctions. Implementation deadline September 2025, with external audit to verify compliance. Vivian set the document down. A policy change. Something that would affect every interaction between Cobb County officers and the public. Something that might prevent the next 10-minute gap. The next convenient malfunction. The next piece of evidence that disappeared when no one was watching. It wasn't justice, but it was something. I'll sign. So. The check arrived in April. She deposited it, paid Patricia's contingency fee, and put the rest in a savings account she didn't touch. The money felt wrong somehow. Compensation for an injury that couldn't be priced. Payment for an experience that shouldn't have happened. She went back to work. Courthouse security. Standing post. The routine that had defined her career for 18 years, now complicated by the fact that everyone knew her name. The other marshals treated her differently. Not badly. No one was hostile. No one suggested she shouldn't have filed the complaint, but differently. She'd become a symbol of something. A test case. The officer who'd proven that even federal law enforcement wasn't immune to profiling, and who'd used her training to ensure there were consequences. Some of them admired her for it. Some of them were uncomfortable. Most just didn't know what to say. She understood. She'd become a disruption in the narrative they told themselves about the work they did. The idea that a badge protected you, that being part of the system meant the system would protect you back, was comforting, necessary even. You couldn't do this job if you believed you were as vulnerable as the civilians you served. But she'd proven the comfort was an illusion, that the badge had mattered only after the fact, only because it made the evidence impossible to dismiss. In the moment, in that store, she'd been just another black woman being detained for existing while shopping. The badge hadn't protected her, only the training had. June brought news. Pike pled guilty to a misdemeanor charge of civil rights violation under 18 U.S.C. Sector 242. The federal prosecutor had offered the deal, reduced charge, no jail time, in exchange for cooperation with the ongoing investigation into Hart's evidence tampering. 18 months probation, community service, a fine that amounted to less than 2 months' salary. No jail. Vivian read the news on her phone during lunch break, sat with it for a long moment. This was how it worked. Federal civil rights prosecutions were notoriously difficult. The statute required proof of willful intent, that the officer knew they were violating constitutional rights and did it anyway. Prosecutors won less than half these cases at trial. A guilty plea, even to a misdemeanor, was considered a victory. Pike would never work in law enforcement again. His name would appear in databases. His career was over. But he wouldn't spend a day in jail for what he'd done to her. She put the phone away, went back to work. That evening, Marcus Delwood called. "You heard about Pike?" "I heard." "Whitmore wanted me to tell you. She pushed for felony charges, wanted to take it to trial, but the evidence was complicated. The footage gap, the witness statements, your defensive training, defense attorneys would have had a field day with all of it. She's a federal agent. She could have ended this any time. She chose to let it escalate. That kind of thing. I know how it works." A pause on the line. "Hart's case is still pending. The evidence destruction charge is solid. Grand jury should return an indictment next month." "And Avery?" "Retired last week. Full pension. Moved to Florida." She closed her eyes. Full pension. After signing a trespass warning against a federal officer based on false reports, after failing to investigate, after being part of a system that had been targeting black shoppers for 18 months. Full pension. "Vivian," Delwood's voice was careful, "I know this isn't what you wanted. It's not what any of us wanted, but the DOJ investigation is still active. The pattern or practice inquiry is moving forward. There's a chance, a real chance, that something bigger comes out of this." "I know." You did the right thing, filing the complaint, pushing forward, making them look at evidence they would have buried otherwise. I know that too. Does it help? She thought about it. About Pike's probation and Avery's pension and Lila's transfer to Alabama. About the bodycam policy that was still pending budget approval. About the 22 black shoppers who'd been harassed before her, whose complaints had gone nowhere because they didn't have badges or federal prosecutors or 18 years of training in how to survive a system designed to dismiss them. Not really. Yeah. Delwood exhaled. I didn't think so, but I wanted to say it anyway. September came. The one-year anniversary of the incident passed without ceremony. Vivian read the news that morning. Cobb County Gazette, September 15, 2025. Headline: Body camera policy rollout delayed. Citing budget constraints, Cobb County Police Department has postponed full implementation of its new body camera policy until 2026. Department spokesperson stated that officer training is ongoing and partial implementation has begun in select units. The policy, mandated as part of a civil rights settlement earlier this year, requires automatic cloud backup of all footage to prevent local deletion. Implementation was originally scheduled for September 2025. We remain committed to transparency and accountability, the spokesperson said. The delay is purely logistical and does not reflect any change in our department's priorities. Delayed, partial, ongoing. The words that made systems stay the same. Vivian cut out the article, added it to her file. The documentation that had started as evidence for a complaint and become something else, a record of how slowly institutions changed, how hard they fought to stay exactly as they were. She went to work, stood post, came home. The routine continued. The Saturday after the anniversary, Vivian walked into a coffee shop in Decatur. Not the one near her apartment, a different place, 2 miles east, where she'd started going after the incident because she couldn't stand the thought of being recognized. She ordered her usual. Black coffee, no sugar. Found a corner seat facing the door. Opened her phone to check emails. A woman approached. 60s, gray hair, elegantly styled. Expensive handbag. Designer, not Bellamy & Cole, but the same tier of wealth. No pearls today, just a simple gold chain at her throat and an expression that mixed determination with something that might have been shame. Vivian recognized her immediately. The mall, the 911 call, aggressive, refusing to cooperate. The woman stopped at her table, stood there for a moment, gathering courage, or words, or both. "Excuse me, I think I owe you an apology." Vivian set down her phone, said nothing, waited. "I saw the news, about what happened, about who you are." The woman's voice wavered slightly. "I called the police that day. I told them you were aggressive. You weren't. I saw what I expected to see. I'm ashamed of that." The silence stretched. The coffee shop bustled around them. Conversations, espresso machines, the ordinary sounds of ordinary life. "What's your name?" The question seemed to surprise her. "Judith. Judith Carmine." "Judith." Vivian gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down." Judith sat. Her hands were shaking slightly. She clasped them in her lap, trying to hide it. "I appreciate you saying that. It took courage to approach me." Judith's eyes watered. "I've been thinking about it for months. What I did. How easily I did it. I didn't even question myself. I saw a black woman arguing with security and I assumed—" She stopped, swallowed. "I've been that person my whole life. Making calls like that in my head, even if I don't always make them out loud. Deciding who belongs and who doesn't based on nothing real." Vivian let her finish. Let her sit with the confession. "But I need you to understand something, Judith. Your call could have gotten me killed." The words landed hard. Judith flinched. "Not because you're a bad person. Not because you wanted to harm me. But because the system you called responds to words like aggressive and black in ways that put people like me in danger. Police hear those words and they arrive ready for a threat, ready to use force, ready to shoot if something goes wrong. Judith's tears were falling now. I didn't think. No, you didn't. That's the problem. You didn't have to think. The assumptions were already there, built into everything you've been taught about who's dangerous and who isn't. You made a call based on those assumptions, and someone else had to live with the consequences. Vivian's voice wasn't angry, wasn't accusing, just clear, direct. The tone of someone who'd had this conversation before, maybe not out loud, but in her head, countless times. What can I do? Judith's voice was barely a whisper. To make it right? Vivian considered the question. There was no way to make it right. No way to undo the call, the 911 recording that still existed in a file somewhere, the words that had shaped everything that followed. But there was something else. Next time you see something, anything, ask yourself what you're actually seeing, not what you're expecting, not what you've been taught to fear, what's actually in front of you. Judith nodded, wiped her eyes. And then? Then decide if it really warrants a call. Most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time, what you're seeing is just people living their lives in ways that make you uncomfortable, and discomfort isn't an emergency. Judith stood, unsteady. The conversation had cost her something. Certainty, perhaps. The comfort of believing herself a good person who didn't need to examine her assumptions. Thank you for talking to me, for not being cruel. Vivian picked up her coffee. I'm not in the business of cruelty, Judith. I'm just in the business of truth. Judith walked away. Vivian watched her go, watched her push through the coffee shop door and disappear into the September sunshine. The conversation hadn't fixed anything, hadn't changed the system, hadn't brought accountability to anyone who mattered. But it was something. A crack in one person's assumptions. A moment of recognition that might lead to a different choice the next time. It wasn't justice, but it was a start. Correctness. That night, Vivian sat at her kitchen table with the file. Everything was there. The complaint forms, the FOIA documents, the settlement papers, the news clippings, the timeline she'd built over months, dates, names, outcomes, the slow accumulation of partial victories and systemic resistance. She opened the FOIA response from Hartwell Luxury Group. The pages she'd received back in January, heavily redacted, mostly useless. Mostly. Page 47. An email dated August 2023, more than a year before her incident. Sender, redacted. Recipient, Lila Fairbanks. Subject, Loss Prevention Protocol. The body was mostly blacked out. Heavy redactions that obscured everything except a few fragments. Continue current approach per regional directive. Numbers support. Complaints minimal. Settlements preferred to expand to additional locations if pilot successful. Regional directive. Numbers support. Expand to additional locations. Someone at Hartwell Luxury Group, someone above Lila, someone with authority to issue directives, had known about the targeting, had approved it, had measured its success by the absence of complaints and the preference for quiet settlements. This wasn't one store manager's prejudice. This was policy, corporate policy, implemented across multiple locations, designed to be invisible until someone with enough resources and stubbornness pulled the thread. Vivian opened her laptop, typed into the search bar, Hartwell Luxury Group discrimination complaints, 47 results. Lawsuits, EEOC complaints, news articles from a dozen states, customer complaints, employee complaints, a pattern that spread far beyond one mall in Georgia. She saved the search results, added them to her file. The DOJ investigation was looking at Cobb County Police, at local patterns, at the officers involved in her case. But the corporate side, the regional directive, the pilot program, the expansion to additional locations, that was a different thread, one that no one had pulled yet. She picked up her phone, considered calling Patricia, considered calling Delwood, considered calling Whitmore. Instead, she set the phone down, closed the laptop, let the questions sit unanswered. Some fights were for tomorrow. Tonight, she needed to rest. The phone woke her at 6 a.m. Unknown number. No caller ID. She answered on the third ring. Tate. Silence on the line. Then breathing. Not threatening, not heavy, just present. Someone was there. Someone wasn't speaking. Who is this? More silence. Then a click. The call ended. She checked the number. Tried to call back. 4 rings, then, the number you have reached is no longer in service. Probably nothing. A wrong number, a glitch, someone's pocket dial that cut off before it could become a conversation. Probably. She saved the call to her log anyway. Added a note, 6:02 a.m. Unknown number, 23 seconds. No voice. Disconnected. Then she got up, made coffee, started her day. 3 weeks later, a memo arrived. It came through official channels, Department of Justice letterhead, marked for internal distribution, flagged as relevant to her case. Delwood had forwarded it with a note. Thought you'd want to see this. Subject: DOJ pattern or practice investigation. Update: Northern District of Georgia. September 30th, 2025. Preliminary findings indicate systemic concerns extending beyond the initial incident under review. Evidence suggests coordinated practices between private security contractors and local law enforcement at multiple retail locations in the metro Atlanta area. Investigation expanding to include all safe security services contracts at 14 additional malls in Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. DOJ Civil Rights Division recommending appointment of federal monitor to oversee compliance reforms. Monitoring period under consideration. 18 months. Additional discovery ongoing. Full report expected Q2 2026. Vivian read it twice, 3 times. 14 malls, 3 states, a federal monitor. 1 incident that became an investigation. 1 investigation that became a pattern. 1 pattern that might lead to something systemic. She filed the memo with everything else. The evidence, the documentation, the raw material of accountability that she'd been building since October. It wasn't justice. Justice would have been never being grabbed in the first place, never being detained, never being threatened, never being made to feel that her life depended on keeping her hands visible and her voice steady. Justice would have been a world where a black woman could browse handbags without becoming a case number. But this, the investigation, the expansion, the federal monitor, this was something. A crack in a system that had been operating in the dark. A light switched on in a room that preferred shadows. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was more than most people got. October arrived. A year and 2 weeks since the incident. Vivian stood at her bathroom mirror, getting ready for work. The bruises had faded months ago, healed so completely that she couldn't find them anymore, even when she looked. The only evidence they'd ever existed was in photographs, stored in her file, time-stamped and documented. She picked up her credentials, badge, ID card, the marshal's star that she'd earned 18 years ago and carried every day since. For a moment, she just held them, felt their weight. Still here, she said to her reflection. It wasn't a victory cry, wasn't a declaration, just a fact. A statement of survival. She was still here, still working, still standing post outside courtrooms where other people's fates were decided, still fighting. Even when fighting meant paperwork and patience and the slow grind of institutional change. She clipped the credentials to her belt, grabbed her keys, headed for the door. The coffee shop 2 miles east had just opened a second location, closer to Northgate Galleria, same parking deck where everything had started, 1 year and 2 weeks ago. She hadn't decided if she'd go, hadn't decided if she wanted to see that place again, the marble floors, the vaulted ceilings, the store where a manager had looked at her and seen nothing but a threat. Maybe she would. Maybe she wouldn't. The choice was hers. That was the thing that mattered. The last document in her file was a news clipping, dated October 10, 2025. Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Headline: Federal Monitor appointed for Cobb County Police. The Department of Justice announced today the appointment of a federal monitor to oversee reforms at the Cobb County Police Department. The monitorship, expected to last 18 months, follows a year-long investigation into civil rights practices triggered by a high-profile incident at Northgate Galleria Mall. This appointment represents a significant step toward accountability, said Assistant U.S. Attorney Denise Whitmore in a statement. The department has committed to meaningful reforms, and federal oversight will ensure those commitments are honored. The investigation expanded earlier this year to include 14 additional retail locations across Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee, as well as security contractor All-Safe Services. Federal prosecutors have not ruled out additional charges. Deputy U.S. Marshal Vivian Tate, whose October 2024 complaint initiated the investigation, declined to comment for this story. Through her attorney, she issued a brief statement. The system moves slowly, but sometimes it moves. Vivian had written that statement herself, 4 sentences that said everything she wanted to say. The system moves slowly, but sometimes it moves, not always, not enough, not fast enough to protect everyone who needed protection or punish everyone who deserved punishment. The system was built by humans, flawed like humans, prone to the same blindness and bias and institutional inertia that had allowed 22 black shoppers to be harassed before anyone noticed. But it could be pushed, could be forced to see what it preferred to ignore, could be made to change, one policy at a time, one monitor at a time, one documented incident at a time. That was the work. Not justice. That was too grand a word for what was possible. Just accountability. Just the slow, grinding effort to make the cost of discrimination high enough that someone, somewhere, decided it wasn't worth it. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was what she had, what anyone had, and she would keep pushing. Sunday morning, October 12th. Clear skies, cool air, the first hints of fall settling over Atlanta. Vivian drove to the coffee shop near Northgate Galleria, the new location, the one she'd been avoiding for weeks. She parked in the deck, level 3, east side, the same level where she'd parked her Honda a year ago before trading it in for a car that wasn't in any database Pike could access. She sat for a moment, looked at the concrete walls, the camera near the stairwell, the exit sign glowing green. Then she got out, walked to the elevator, rode it down. The mall was busy for a Sunday morning. Families with strollers, teenagers in groups, the ambient piano still playing somewhere near the food court. Bellamy and Cole was still there. Corner unit, floor-to-ceiling windows. She could see the displays from here, handbags arranged like art installations, the same way they'd been arranged a year ago. The Sinclair tote was still on the wall. Cognac leather, brass hardware, $1,200. She thought about walking in, thought about buying it, the bag she'd originally come for, the gift to herself that had been derailed by assumption and aggression and a security guard's hand on her arm. She thought about what it would mean. A reclamation, a refusal to be driven away, a statement that this space was hers as much as anyone's. But she didn't walk in, not because she was afraid, not because the memory was too painful, but because the bag didn't matter anymore. Had never really mattered. It was leather and hardware and thread, beautiful, well-made, ultimately just a thing. What mattered was everything else. The file, the investigation, the monitor, the policy changes that might prevent someone else from being grabbed in a store for the crime of shopping while black. What mattered was the work. She walked past Bellamy and Cole, didn't look in, found the coffee shop on the other side of the mall, and ordered her usual, black coffee, no sugar. The barista smiled, asked if she wanted room for cream. She said no. Normal, ordinary, unremarkable, the way shopping should be. She found a seat near the window, watched the mall move around her, the shoppers, the families, the security guards doing their rounds. One of them was black, young, early 20s, all-safe uniform. He walked with the careful posture of someone new to the job, someone still learning how to project authority without provoking confrontation. She watched him pass, wondered if he knew about the investigation, wondered if his training had changed, if the federal monitor had reached all safe yet, if anyone had told him about the pattern that had operated for 18 months before a complaint finally stuck. Probably not. Change took time, filtered down slowly. Most people at the bottom never knew about the fights happening above them. But maybe someone had mentioned it. Maybe he'd read a news article, heard a rumor, connected dots that hadn't been connected before. Maybe he'd think twice before grabbing someone's arm. Maybe. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She tensed. Thought of the call 3 weeks ago. The silence, the disconnection, the number that was no longer in service. But this text was different. This one had words. Ms. Tate, I'm a journalist with the AJC investigating all safe security. I've obtained internal documents suggesting the company knew about discriminatory practices at multiple locations. Would you be willing to speak on background? I can meet whenever works for you. Sarah Chen, she'd seen the byline. Investigative reporter, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, specialized in accountability journalism. Another thread. Another person pulling at the system. Vivian typed a response. I can meet, but I want to see the documents first, and I won't be quoted by name until I know what you have. The reply came in seconds. Understood. I'll send what I can. Thank you. She put the phone away, finished her coffee, watched the mall for another few minutes. Then she stood, walked out, drove home. The file on her kitchen table was waiting. The documentation, the evidence, the raw material of accountability. She opened her laptop, started a new folder. All safe investigation, journalist contact. The work continued. That night, she dreamed. Not about the mall, not about Pike or Morton or the hand on her arm. She'd stopped dreaming about those things months ago, the images fading into the background noise of memory, present but no longer urgent. She dreamed about the veteran, the one with the gray beard and the 82nd Airborne patch who'd stepped forward when no one else would, who'd been pushed back by Hart, who'd stayed anyway, watching, witnessing, refusing to look away. In the dream, he was younger, wearing fatigues, standing in a place she didn't recognize, desert maybe, or somewhere that had once been green and wasn't anymore. He looked at her across the distance, didn't speak, just nodded once. I see you. I remember you. She woke up at 4 a.m., lay in the dark for a long time. She'd never learned his name, never tracked him down among the witnesses. He'd given his statement to the FBI and then disappeared back into the ordinary life that had brought him to a mall on a Saturday afternoon. Somewhere out there, he was living that life, maybe thinking about what he'd seen, maybe not, but he'd stood up, when it mattered, when everyone else was frozen. That was something too. The last page of her file was blank. She'd left it that way on purpose, space for whatever came next. The journalist's investigation, the federal monitor's reports, the criminal case against Hart, still pending, still grinding through the system. The story wasn't over, wouldn't be over for years, maybe ever. Systems didn't change in neat 3-act structures with clear resolutions. They shifted slowly, incrementally, fighting every inch. But they shifted, and she would be there, documenting every step, filing every receipt, building the record that someone, someday, might use to push things further than she'd been able to push them. That was the work. Not justice, just accountability. Not victory, just progress. Not the end, just another beginning. She closed the file, went to bed. Tomorrow, she would stand post outside a courtroom, would watch for threats, would be visible enough to deter, invisible enough not to distract. Tomorrow, she would be Deputy U.S. Marshal Vivian Tate. Badge number 4471, 18 years of service, 6 commendations, 0 disciplinary actions. Tomorrow, she would do the job she'd trained for. But tonight, she was just a woman who'd been through something, who'd survived it, who'd fought back in the only way the system allowed. Still here, she thought. And then she slept. Epilogue, 6 months later. April 2026. The cherry blossoms were blooming in Decatur, pink and white explosions along every street. Vivian sat in a conference room at the U.S. Attorney's office. Whitmore was there. Delwood was there. Patricia Hendricks, her civil attorney, sat beside her with a legal pad full of notes. On the table between them, a bound report, 300 pages, DOJ letterhead, pattern or practice investigation, Cobb County Police Department. Final report and recommendations, April 2026. Whitmore opened to the executive summary. Read the key findings aloud. Investigation confirms systemic practices of racially discriminatory policing at multiple retail locations in Cobb County between 2021 and 2024. Evidence demonstrates coordination between private security contractor Allsafe Services and local law enforcement, including shared targeting protocols and mutual protection arrangements. She turned the page. Recommendations include mandatory retraining for all officers, revised use of force policies, enhanced civilian oversight, termination of contract with Allsafe Services, ongoing monitoring for minimum 36 months. She looked up. The county has agreed to all recommendations. The consent decree will be signed next week. Vivian sat with that for a moment. A consent decree, federal oversight, mandatory reforms with enforcement mechanisms. It wasn't everything. Pike's misdemeanor plea was still a misdemeanor. Avery's pension was still intact. Lila Fairbanks was still employed, just in a different state. The 22 people harassed before Vivian, their stories had been acknowledged in the report, but never individually addressed. But it was more than had existed before. More than would have existed without her complaint. More than most people who filed grievances against police ever achieved. "What about Hart?" she asked. "Pled guilty last month. Felony obstruction. 18 months federal prison, 3 years supervised release." Whitmore's voice was neutral, professional. "He'll serve probably 12 months with good behavior. Then he's out." 12 months. For deleting evidence that might have sent an innocent woman to jail. For being part of a system that had operated in the dark for years. It wasn't enough. But it was something. And Allsafe? Companies under investigation by 3 state attorneys general. The documents Sarah Chen published last month, the internal memos about targeting protocols, those triggered additional complaints in Alabama and Tennessee. Federal Monitor recommended expanding the consent decree to include their contracts nationwide. Patricia leaned forward. There's also the class action. 47 plaintiffs so far, all former customers who were profiled at Allsafe contracted locations. Hartwell Luxury Group is named as a defendant. Their legal team is already talking settlement. 47 plaintiffs. 47 people who'd had experiences like hers, grabbed, accused, humiliated, and who'd finally found a way to make the system acknowledge it. That was something, too. The meeting ended an hour later. Handshakes, thank yous, the ritual completion of something that had taken 18 months to build. Vivian walked out of the federal building into the April sunshine. Cherry blossoms drifted on the breeze, landing on sidewalks and cars and the shoulders of people passing by. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Chen. Stories live. Front page tomorrow. Thank you for everything. She opened the link, read the headline. Federal report exposes years of racial profiling. Consent. Decree mandates sweeping reforms. The story was thorough, detailed, all the receipts laid out in careful prose, the call logs, the bodycam gaps, the internal memos, the pattern that had operated for years before anyone with power had noticed. Her name appeared in the third paragraph. Deputy U.S. Marshal Vivian Tate, whose October 2024 complaint initiated the investigation. She closed the article. Put the phone away. The story was out there now. Part of the public record. Part of history. But the work wasn't done. Would never be done. Tomorrow there would be another incident somewhere. Another person grabbed for shopping while black. Another body cam malfunction. Another complaint filed into a system that preferred to ignore them. The difference, the only difference, was that now there was a record. A precedent. A case file that proved it was possible to push back and survive. That was what she'd built. Not justice, just a foundation. Someone else would build the next layer, and someone after them, and someone after them. That was how systems changed. Not in dramatic revelations and overnight transformations. In slow accumulation, in stubborn persistence, in the refusal to let the story end with silence. She walked to her car, got in, sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. The settlement check had long since cleared. The bruises had long since healed. The body cam policy was finally implemented, 6 months late, but implemented. And somewhere in a federal database, there was a file. 300 pages of evidence. 47 plaintiffs. A consent decree that would last 36 months. Not enough. Never enough. But more than there had been before. She started the car, pulled out of the parking space, drove toward home. The cherry blossoms fell around her, pink and white against the gray asphalt. Beautiful and temporary. Here for a few weeks, then gone until next year. She would be here next year too. Still working, still fighting, still building the record one document at a time. The system moves slowly, she thought, but sometimes it moves. And she drove on, into the spring afternoon, toward whatever came next. 3 weeks after the consent decree was signed, Vivian received a package. No return address. No postmark, which meant it had been hand-delivered, slipped into her mailbox sometime between when she left for work at 6 a.m. and when she returned at 7 p.m. She stood in her apartment lobby, holding the manila envelope, feeling its weight. Light. Maybe a few pages inside. Nothing that ticked or shifted or suggested anything dangerous. But the absence of a return address made her pulse quicken. She carried it upstairs, set it on her kitchen table, stared at it for a long moment. Then she put on gloves, latex from a box she kept under the sink, and carefully slit the envelope open. Inside, a single USB drive and a handwritten note on plain white paper. You only pulled one thread. There are others. Be careful who you trust. No signature. No identifying marks. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, the kind that suggested someone had taken time to ensure it couldn't be easily traced. She held the USB drive up to the light. Standard black plastic. No labels, no markings. Every instinct she'd developed over 18 years told her not to plug it into anything connected to her personal network. The drive could contain malware, tracking software, something designed to compromise her devices and expose her communications. But it could also contain evidence. Documents. The next layer of whatever she'd uncovered. She set the drive down, picked up her phone, dialed a number from memory. Delwood. It's Tate. I just received something. Anonymous delivery. USB drive with a note. A pause. What does the note say? She read it to him. Another pause. Longer this time. Don't plug it into anything. Bring it to my office tomorrow. We'll have the lab look at it. Air-gapped system, full forensic protocol. You think it's legitimate? I think someone went to a lot of trouble to get your attention. Whether that's because they want to help or because they want to hurt you. He exhaled. We'll know more tomorrow. She didn't sleep that night either. The USB drive sat on her kitchen table, inert and silent, but somehow radiating presence. A question she couldn't answer. A door she couldn't see through. You only pulled one thread. The Hartwell email, the regional directive, the redacted sender whose name had been blacked out in every document she'd obtained. Someone knew more than she did. Someone had access to information that hadn't appeared in any FOIA response, any court filing, any journalist's investigation. Someone was watching. At 3 a.m., she got up, made tea she wouldn't drink, stood at her window looking down at the street. A car was parked across from her building, headlights off, engine running. She watched it for 10 minutes. It didn't move. Then, slowly, it pulled away, turned the corner, disappeared. She wrote down the time, added it to a log she'd started keeping months ago. Unexplained vehicles, unknown callers, the small anomalies that might mean nothing or might mean everything. The log was getting longer. Check. The FBI's Digital Evidence Laboratory took 3 days to analyze the drive. Vivian sat in Delwood's office when the report came back, watching his face as he read it on his screen. His expression shifted, neutral to interested to something that looked almost like alarm. What is it? He turned the monitor so she could see. 11 files, all PDFs, all internal communications from Hartwell Luxury Group's corporate headquarters, dated between 2019 and 2023. He clicked on the first one. A memo appeared. Company letterhead, executive distribution list, subject line reading, LP Initiative, Phase 2 Expansion, LP, Loss Prevention. The same phrase from the redacted email she'd obtained months ago. These are the unredacted versions, she said slowly. Someone sent me the documents Hartwell's lawyers fought to keep hidden. Not just that, Delwood scrolled down. Look at the distribution list. She looked, read the names. Regional Vice President, Southeast Division, Chief Operating Officer, General Counsel. And at the top, CC'd on every message. Office of the CEO. They knew, she said, at the highest level. They knew what was happening, and they authorized it. It gets worse. He clicked to another document. This one's from 2021. It's a cost-benefit analysis. The spreadsheet filled the screen. Columns and rows. Numbers that took a moment to parse. Projected shoplifting losses prevented, 2.3 M annually. Projected settlement costs, profiling complaints, 800K annually. Net benefit, 1.5 M. At the bottom, a handwritten note had been scanned with the document, acceptable risk. Continue current approach, RHRH initials she didn't recognize. But initials that belonged to someone with enough authority to approve a corporate policy of racial profiling because the math worked out in their favor. Who's RH? Delwood pulled up another file, an organizational chart. Robert Hutchins, CEO of Hartwell Luxury Group from 2018 to 2024. He retired 6 months ago. Full golden parachute, $30 million. Retired. After the investigation started, after the consent decree was announced, after the walls started closing in, but not before he'd cashed out, not before he'd escaped with his fortune intact. Can we use this? That's the question. Delwood leaned back. The documents appear authentic. The lab found no evidence of tampering, but we don't know where they came from. We don't know who sent them. And we don't know if they were obtained legally. Does it matter if they're real? It matters for prosecution, fruit of the poisonous tree. If these were stolen, hacked, obtained through illegal means, a defense attorney could argue they're inadmissible. The whole case could collapse. Vivian stared at the screen, at the spreadsheet that reduced human beings to line items, at the initials of a man who'd decided that $800,000 in settlements was an acceptable cost for maintaining a policy of discrimination. So he just gets away with it? I didn't say that. Delwood's voice was careful. I said prosecution is complicated, but there are other options. Civil suits. SEC investigations if shareholders weren't informed of legal liability. Congressional inquiries. Media exposure. He paused. Someone sent you these documents for a reason. They want this information to get out. They're just using you as the conduit. Someone with credibility, someone the press will listen to, someone who can't be easily dismissed as a disgruntled employee or a competitor with an agenda. So I'm being used. You're being trusted. There's a difference. He met her eyes. The question is, what do you want to do with that trust? She called Sarah Chen that afternoon. I have something you need to see, but there are conditions. A pause on the line, the sound of a door closing. I'm listening. The documents can't be traced back to me. I won't be quoted. I won't be named as a source. As far as anyone knows, they came to you through your own investigation. That's not how journalism works. I need to verify provenance. I need to understand where they came from. I can tell you where they came from. An anonymous source. Hand-delivered. FBI lab confirmed they're authentic and unaltered. Another pause. Longer. Vivian, Sarah's voice was careful. If you have evidence of corporate misconduct at the CEO level, that's not just a story, that's federal territory. SEC, DOJ, potentially criminal referrals. Dropping it to a journalist could complicate prosecution. Prosecution of who? The man who authorized all of this retired with $30 million. He's on a beach somewhere while the consent decree cleans up his mess. There's not going to be a prosecution. There's barely going to be accountability. You don't know that. I know how this works. I've been in the system for 18 years. I know who gets prosecuted and who gets golden parachutes. I know which cases move forward and which ones disappear into committee hearings and regulatory hand-wringing. She paused, took a breath. These documents prove that a Fortune 500 company had a written policy of racial profiling approved at the highest level. That's not something that should stay buried in an evidence locker waiting for a prosecution that will never happen. That's something the public needs to see. Silence on the line. The sound of Sarah thinking. Send them to me, encrypted. I'll review them tonight and call you in the morning. The story broke 2 weeks later. Exclusive. Internal documents. Show Hartwell CEO approved racial profiling policy. Cost-benefit analysis, called discrimination settlements. Acceptable risk, Sarah's byline. Front page of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, picked up by national outlets within hours. The documents were embedded in the online version, PDFs that anyone could download, read, verify for themselves. The spreadsheet with its cold mathematics. The memos with their corporate euphemisms. The initials RH at the bottom of every authorization. By noon, Hartwell's stock had dropped 11%. By evening, 3 board members had issued statements distancing themselves from Hutchins. By the following morning, the SEC had announced it was opening a preliminary inquiry into whether shareholders had been adequately informed of legal risks related to the company's loss prevention policies. Vivian watched it all from her apartment, refreshing news feeds, reading comments, tracking the ripple effects of information released into the world. It still wasn't justice. Hutchins was still retired, still wealthy, still untouchable by any legal mechanism she could see. But his name was in every headline now, his initials on documents that proved what kind of man he was, his legacy rewritten in real time by journalists and commentators and ordinary people who read the spreadsheet and understood exactly what it meant. That was something. Not enough, but something. Chapter. Her phone rang at 10 p.m. Unknown number. She answered on the second ring. Tate. You did good. A voice she didn't recognize. Male, older, with a slight rasp that suggested years of cigarettes or shouting or both. Who is this? Someone who's been watching. Someone who thought you might have the spine to do what needed to be done. You sent the documents. I facilitated their delivery. Let's leave it at that. She moved to the window, looked down at the street. No mysterious cars tonight, just the ordinary traffic of a city going about its business. Why me? Because you didn't quit. 18 months of hearings and depositions and delays, and you didn't quit. Do you know how rare that is? Most people give up after the first complaint goes nowhere. Most people decide it's not worth the trouble. I'm a federal officer. I had resources most people don't have. You had resources, but you also had reasons to stay quiet. Career considerations, institutional loyalty, the pressure to let it go and move on. You ignored all of that. She didn't respond. Waited. There are more threads, the voice continued. Hartwell is one company. All Safe is one contractor. But the pattern, the practice of weaponizing security against certain customers, that's everywhere. Retail chains, hotels, airports, anywhere that private security interfaces with law enforcement, there are arrangements, understandings, protocols that never get written down, but everyone follows. Why are you telling me this? Because someone needs to keep pulling. Someone needs to keep documenting, and because I'm not going to be around much longer to do it myself. Something in his voice, a weight, a finality, made her pause. Are you in danger? We're all in danger, Deputy Marshal. Some of us just know it better than others. A dry laugh. But no, I'm not being dramatic. I'm old. I'm sick. I've got maybe 6 months if the doctors are being optimistic, which they usually aren't. Who are you? A long pause. Someone who spent 30 years inside a system that I thought was fixable, who filed reports that got buried, who watched good people get pushed out while the ones who played along got promoted, who finally realized that the only way to make any of it matter was to stop playing by the rules. A whistleblower. An old man with nothing left to lose and a filing cabinet full of things that should have seen daylight years ago. He coughed, a wet, painful sound. You'll receive more packages over the coming months. Different companies, different jurisdictions, all connected by the same patterns. What you do with them is up to you. I'm not a journalist. I'm not an investigator. I'm a courthouse security officer. You're someone who didn't quit. That makes you exactly the right person. The line went dead. She stood at the window for a long time after the call ended, watching the street, thinking about patterns, about threads, about a filing cabinet full of secrets held by a dying man who'd decided to trust her with his legacy. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted it. She'd filed a complaint because she'd been grabbed in a store, and her training had given her the tools to document what happened. That was all. A single incident. A single act of pushing back. But single incidents connected to other incidents. Single acts accumulated into patterns, and patterns, when they were exposed, could sometimes force systems to change. You only pulled one thread. There are others. She thought about the 22 people who'd been profiled at Bellamy and Cole before her, about the 47 plaintiffs in the class action suit, about all the people across the country who'd had similar experiences and never filed complaints because they didn't have badges or lawyers or the stubborn refusal to be dismissed. Those people deserved someone pulling threads on their behalf, too. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, different from the one that had just called. First package arrives next week. Allsafe's parent company. Goes higher than you think. She read it twice, saved it, added it to her log. Then she went to her kitchen table, opened her laptop, created a new folder. Phase 2. The work continued. Outside her window, the city hummed with its ordinary nighttime sounds, cars and conversations and the distant wail of a siren heading somewhere urgent. Somewhere out there, Robert Hutchins was sleeping soundly in whatever mansion his $30 million had purchased. Somewhere, Lila Fairbanks was managing a different store, implementing the same practices under different names. Somewhere, officers like Pike were finding new jobs in new departments, carrying their patterns with them. The system protected its own. That was what systems did. But systems were also made of people, and people could choose differently, could document, could expose, could refuse to let the story end with silence. Vivian didn't know if the voice on the phone was telling the truth, didn't know if the promised packages would arrive, or what they would contain, or whether any of it would matter. But she knew one thing. She would be ready. The file was open. The documentation was ongoing. The work was never finished. Still here, she thought. And somewhere in the city, a dying man with a filing cabinet full of secrets smiled to himself in the dark, knowing he'd found the right person to carry what he'd started. The thread was still being pulled. The end. The story continues. The system resists. And somewhere, a woman who was once just shopping for a handbag has become something else entirely. A keeper of receipts, a puller of threads, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of refusal can set everything else in motion. What happens next is still being written.